No one was supposed to see this image. Not artists, not scientists, not even the people who first unfolded the cloth. Yet burned into the fibers of the Shroud of Turin is a haunting human figure, front and back, marked with wounds that are disturbingly precise. Not symbolic, not artistic, anatomically exact. From the moment it was revealed, one question refused to go away. How could something this detailed exist at all? This image is not painted. There are no brushstrokes, no pigment, no dye. The fibers are not soaked or shaded. The image exists only on the outermost surface of a cloth, thinner than a human hair. Stranger still, when photographed, the light and dark areas reverse perfectly, behaving like a photographic negative, created centuries before photography was ever invented. And then comes the part that still unsettles scientists. When the image was analyzed using modern imaging technology, it revealed three-dimensional depth information, accurate anatomical contours, as if the body had briefly hovered above the cloth, imprinting distance rather than touch. No known artistic method can do this. No proven natural process explains it. So the mystery isn't whether the image is real. It's how it was ever formed. The image you just heard about isn't strange because it's old. It's strange because it behaves in ways a cloth should not behave at all. At first glance, the Shroud of Turin looks faded, almost unimpressive. But the moment you step back or see it captured through a camera, the markings suddenly resolve into a full human form. Not stylized, not symbolic, proportioned with an accuracy that feels medical rather than artistic. It doesn't look like a painting. It looks like information. That's where the disbelief sets in. The image isn't embedded into the cloth. It isn't soaked in. It isn't layered. It exists only on the very outermost fibers, so shallow that removing a fraction of a millimeter would erase it entirely. A result that defies how paint, ink, or dye behaves, and immediately rules out conventional artistic methods. Then comes the part that unsettles scientists the most. When the image is photographed, its light and dark values reverse perfectly, functioning like a photographic negative. And when modern image processing is applied, it reveals three-dimensional depth information, accurate contours of a human body, mapped by distance, not touch, as if the body once hovered above the cloth rather than resting on it. This is why the first question was never, who made this? The real question was, what process could even do this? That question, unanswered, uncomfortable, and unresolved, is why this mystery belongs on History of Questions. Because the Shroud doesn't offer clarity. It offers contradictions. And the more closely it's studied, the more it forces science, history, and logic to confront something they still can't fully explain. What makes this even harder to dismiss is how the image connects directly to what you just learned in point 1. If the image really isn't painted, embedded, or artist-made, then every physical detail suddenly matters. And when researchers examined those details, they realized something unsettling. The body on the cloth follows the rules of Roman crucifixion, with a precision medieval artists never used, and often got wrong. Start with the nails. In medieval paintings, nails are always driven through the palms. It looks cleaner, more symbolic, but anatomically, that would not support a body's weight. On the image, the wounds appear at the wrists, exactly where Roman executioners placed them to keep the victim from tearing free. This wasn't common knowledge until modern anatomy studies confirmed it centuries later. Then there's the blood. Blood doesn't flow randomly. It follows gravity, movement, and position. On the cloth, the blood trails angle differently on the arms and on the torso, consistent with the body alternately hanging and struggling for breath. These patterns match what forensic pathologists expect from crucifixion, not what medieval artists imagined. Paintings show neat drips. This image shows physics. The spear wound is just as precise. Roman soldiers were trained to pierce the right side of the torso, reaching the lung and heart. The wound on the image sits exactly where it should, and shows signs consistent with fluid separation from the chest cavity. Add to that the crown of thorns, which isn't a neat circlet like in paintings, but a cap covering the entire scalp, producing dozens of small puncture wounds. That detail appears nowhere in medieval art, but it fits Roman mockery practices perfectly. So this brings the mystery full circle back to point one. If the image isn't painted, and if the details align with execution methods artists didn't understand, then the question sharpens into something far more uncomfortable. Medieval artists didn't know this. Anatomists didn't know this. Even historians didn't piece it together until modern times. So if no one alive back then understood these details, who did? What you've seen so far already rules out art. But point three is where the mystery stops being uncomfortable and starts being impossible. Because when scientists went looking for paint, ink, or blood, the things that should explain an image like this, they found nothing that behaved the way an image should. Then they tested for pigments and dyes. None were found. No minerals, no binders, no substances capable of surviving centuries while still producing such a detailed image. Even blood, something clearly visible in places, doesn't behave like paint. The image itself isn't made of blood at all. Blood appears only in specific wound areas, sitting on top of the image, not forming it. The most disturbing discovery comes last. The image exists only on the outermost fibers of the cloth, so shallow that it doesn't penetrate even a fraction of a millimeter. Scrape the surface slightly, and the image vanishes. No known paint, ink, heat, or chemical reaction behaves this way. It's not absorbed. It's not embedded. It's not applied. It's more like a scorch without burning. By this point, the mystery should already feel unstable. Art has failed. Chemistry has failed. And now, when scientists tried to analyze the image using computers, the cloth did something no one expected at all. It stopped behaving like an image and started behaving like data. When researchers fed photographs of the image into image analyzers originally developed by NASA, something shocking appeared. Instead of distortion, the image produced accurate three-dimensional relief. Elevation rose where the body should be closer to the cloth. Depth receded where it should be farther away. This wasn't artistic shading. It was distance encoded as brightness. This is known as distance to intensity mapping. In simple terms, the closer a body part would have been to the cloth, the darker the image appears. The farther away, the lighter it becomes. That's exactly how modern 3D scanners work. But the Shroud encodes this information without lasers, without sensors, and without technology. The image behaves like a scan, despite being centuries old. Here's where it gets worse. If you try this same analysis on a painting, a drawing, or a photograph, the result collapses into visual noise. Faces warp, bodies stretch, depth becomes meaningless. But the Shroud doesn't collapse. The proportions stay intact. The anatomy holds. The data remains coherent, something that should be impossible if the image were made by a human hand. And there's one final twist. This three-dimensional behavior only works properly when the image is treated as a photographic negative. Flip it back to a normal positive image, and the depth breaks. That means the image was formed in a way that anticipates inversion, something no artist could have planned, and no medieval mind could have understood. So now the question sharpens again. Why does a linen cloth behave like a 3D scan? And what kind of event creates an image that stores depth without ever touching the surface? That question doesn't belong in a museum. It belongs here on History of Questions. By now, every familiar explanation has collapsed. Art failed. Chemistry hesitated. Physics started acting strangely. So scientists were forced into an uncomfortable position, not to prove what happened, but to ask what kind of process could even leave an image like this behind. That's where theory replaces certainty, and why this mystery refuses to settle. One proposal suggests a sudden burst of energy. Not heat in the ordinary sense and not fire, but an intense release capable of altering the outermost fibers of the cloth instantly. The idea is controversial, but it attempts to explain two things at once: why the image is so shallow, and why it encodes distance information without pressure. The problem? No known natural energy burst behaves this precisely without destroying the fabric. Another theory stays closer to chemistry. It suggests a slow reaction between the cloth and substances released by a human body, gases, moisture, or compounds interacting with the linen over time. In this view, the image forms gradually, almost like a chemical shadow. But there's a major problem. Chemical reactions spread. They bleed. They penetrate. This image does none of that. It stops abruptly at the surface, ignoring how chemistry normally behaves. Then there's the electrical hypothesis. Some researchers have explored the idea of corona discharge, a powerful electrical field capable of discoloring fibers without direct contact. It's one of the few mechanisms that can affect only the surface. But recreations fall short. They damage the cloth. They lack resolution. And they fail to explain the anatomical precision. The theory explains how fibers change, but not why the image is so exact. And then there's the last category, the one scientists don't like naming. An unknown physical process. Not supernatural. Not explained. Simply a placeholder for something not yet understood. This isn't a conclusion. It's an admission. A recognition that the image doesn't fit inside any tested box. And in science, that's not an answer, it's a warning sign. So notice what's happening. Every theory explains part of the image and fails on the rest. Energy without destruction. Chemistry without penetration. Electricity without damage. Each idea works only until the details are examined. And that's why, on History of Questions, this topic never ends with certainty. Because the more carefully it's studied, the clearer one thing becomes. We are not arguing over answers. We're arguing over limits. After everything you've seen, one thing should be clear. The mystery of this image was never about belief versus disbelief. It was about limits. The limits of art. The limits of chemistry. The limits of physics. And every time one explanation feels close, the details quietly tear it apart. What remains is not an answer, but a question that refuses to fade. An image with no brushstrokes. A body with no contact. Depth without touch. Information without a method. Whether it was formed by an unknown physical process, a rare natural event, or something science hasn't yet learned how to describe, the truth is uncomfortable. This object doesn't behave the way it should. And that's why this story doesn't end here. Because the shroud doesn't offer closure, it creates tension. It forces modern science to look backward and admit uncertainty. It reminds us that some questions survive centuries not because they're answered, but because they're too precise to ignore. This is why we explore these mysteries on History of Questions. Not to tell you what to think, but to show you where certainty breaks down. Because sometimes the most honest conclusion isn't an answer at all. It's knowing exactly where knowledge stops. So if this mystery unsettled you, challenged you, or left you with more questions than answers, stay curious. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and tell us in the comments what you think formed the image. Because history isn't just what we know, it's what we're still brave enough to question.